It's my power they never take.
Don't ever take my power, my power, my power. Don't ever take my power, my power, my power.
Hey everybody, welcome back. Welcome for the first time. If it's your first time to Food Literacy for All, tonight our class is going to be on the intersections of queer food. I'm excited for our presenters this evening. So a quick thank yous is that so many groups on campus, as you can see, make this class possible. Particularly this year, the Center for the Education of Women, CEW, is one of our big supporters of the class. I co-lead this class with Dr. Jessica Walker and Dr. Shakira Tyler. It's an awesome team, and there's so many other people that make this class happen. You all might know by now our GSIs for the class, Megan and Ayetzi, and then also Kimmy behind the scenes, and Chris Taylor, who's also DJ Cite for this class. Although I will say that each song is picked out by our presenters of the week. So maybe it gives you a little insight into who's presenting or what their vibes are. This class is free and open to the public. It's so exciting for me to have hundreds of people join us each class, whether they're students or parents or grandparents or chefs or activists or farmers or folks from around the world who are just interested in this class. It's really cool to have you here. You're welcome to tweet about this class if you want, hashtag Food Literacy for All. We always share quotes for like a couple of choice quotes from speakers after each class. If you want to see what they are, just search for Food Literacy for All on Twitter. We do have a couple poll questions throughout class, and of course, all of the classes are filmed, and you can find them all on the SFSI website, so check it out. You can submit questions at any time throughout class. Just please use the Q&A box because they're going to get lost in the chat box. So the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen is the place for questions. And next week, we have Nayaz Dori joining us. It's going to be Valentine's Day, a revolution to take back our ocean and sea-based foods. I know she's got some really good ideas for her talk, so I'm excited for that one. And then also, I want to mark your calendars, even though this is a few weeks away in March, but we're going to have our first in-person event on Tuesday, March 14th. So this class really has not been in person since the first week of March 2020. And we're excited to be back in March 2023 with Fast Food for Thought, which is going to be a really fast-paced and fun event. We're going to have an opening performance by a Detroit-based West African drumming and dance group. And then we're going to have a series of these 5-minute short talks all about food and agriculture. And then we're going to have a reception afterwards. So it's going to be a really special time, special class. And the community, again, is of course invited. It's going to be in the Dana building. So we'll communicate more about that, but I just wanted to let you know, mark your calendars. All right, Jessica, I'm going to pass it off to you.
So I have the pleasure of introducing our guests this evening. I've been following this foundation since they started a few years back, so I'm very excited to have them here tonight. First, we have Sunny Levine, who is on the board of directors for the Queer Food Foundation. She is a digital marketer, food journalist, cook, and lives currently in Baltimore, Maryland. She has held positions across the food industry, ranging from nonprofit research to Fortune 500 innovation strategy. She's an advocate for food justice. Sunny is also interested in the intersection of food technology and sustainability. She received a BA in History and Science with honors from Harvard College and is currently the Senior Associate Product Manager at McCormick & Co. And we have also Vanessa Parrish, who is the founder of the Queer Food Foundation. She is a pastry chef from North Carolina, currently traveling nomadically, where she runs a private catering business called Sweet Comfort for savory and sweet delights. Sweet Comfort Candles is her new endeavor, shipped straight to your door. She's also worked as a specialty pastries coordinator at one of the top restaurants in downtown LA and hosts the show Tasting Our Roots, reaching over 15 million views on BuzzFeed's. I highly recommend it. BuzzFeed's Tasty channel, and is available on Apple TV, Hulu, and Amazon Prime. Vanessa has been featured chef for BET, Blavity, Airbnb, Google, and Food Network platforms. She's currently doing a campaign with Queerty and Nissan about queer food inclusivity. So please help us welcome Vanessa and Sunny.
Thank you, Jessica. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're exceptionally grateful for this opportunity to be a part of University of Michigan Food Literacy for All. We've got a really interesting conversation in store for you folks. So please have an open mind, enjoy the conversation. We are going to have a Q&A afterwards, so get those questions ready to go. We're going to go ahead and start off with some thought starters.
So we prepped these thought starters for you all, and for us as well, to sort of reflect on why we're here, why we are kind of having this conversation, and why this is an important topic. And I think to start off, right, why is representation important for queer folks in the food industry? Why is it important? Why does it matter, right? Why does my sexuality, why does my gender identity matter in the context of food, in the context of food systems, what I eat, how I eat, who I share it with? Because on the surface, right, those elements, those topics are not necessarily intimately connected. But I think the level of connection, the level of intimacy between any identity a person holds and that lived experience is something that we all kind of need to take into account. So, Vanessa?
Yes, it's important because we're working on relearning. We're in an industry that is not used to having these conversations. So we're giving them an opportunity to give us a voice, start with the inclusivity, and unlearning new things as well that created that toxic work cultures, that toxic kitchen culture that we're trying to eradicate.
And then I think second question, right? What are the barriers that prevent folks from doing that kind of connection, from connecting food justice and queer identity? And so when we think about food itself, right? Maybe a recipe that I cook, it doesn't automatically mean it's a queer recipe, but food is very much a product of all of our environments, all of our intersections. It is the number one way in which we interact with the planet, and the number one way in which we interact with each other. So if you're not part of the community, if this is not an identity you hold, it may not be the most intuitive area. And I think that is a barrier, right, for us. But queerness is not always a visible identity. It is an element of identity that can be the second or third or fourth or fifth or the 10th thing relevant on an introduction list. But it's still something that impacts lived experience, that impacts access, and therefore impacts what we do in the kitchen, out of the kitchen, in every way we participate in food systems.
Right. So also when we're having this conversation about preventing people from connecting within those intersections, we're also having the conversation of why there's a disconnect and what we're trying to do to bridge those gaps at the same time. Obviously, these existing barriers have been systemically in place. So we're also having that conversation of what we're doing to reconnect into the new space.
Awesome. So today we are going to talk about just two main components of how food systems are interacting with broader queer or LGBTQ plus identities. And that boils down to access and experience. And when we say access, we are talking about a multi-pronged concept, right? First, there's access to food itself, literal sustenance, which we'll hop into first, and then we'll hop over and chat about access to participate in those broader food systems, focusing on industry roles, both paid and unpaid. And then we'll dive into different levels of experience that Vanessa and I have each had, obviously operating in very different sectors of the food industry with very different lived experiences and identities, and kind of how some of that plays in. And I want to start by talking specifically within access about food insecurity and food insufficiency within the queer community and within all of those sub-communities. We talk a lot about various issues overall that impact the LGBTQ community. There are a lot of places to focus, to be honest. It's pretty well documented that queer folks are more likely to face issues with mental health, with housing access, with community acceptance, with financial stability, with career access. And all of those factors, all of those pressures create an environment that is actually increasing the risk of food insecurity and food insufficiency as essentially this cultural comorbidity. And so what does that look like? Well, taking a step back from the USDA, like what does it mean to be food insecure, or what does it mean to be food insufficient? So their definition, the USDA's definition of food insecurity, means that a household at some point in time was not able to acquire adequate food for at least one household member because of insufficient money, because of other food resourcing. It has a couple of levels of severity. You can have very low food insecurity or low. And if you're experiencing very low food security, then you have disrupted eating patterns. There are, patterns of reduced food intake. And food insufficiency is sort of the boiled down, simpler measure of that, right? It's easier to pull, and it essentially is just meaning that a household sometimes or often doesn't have enough to eat. So when we think about what that looks like within the queer community, right, food insufficiency is objectively more common among members of the LGBT community. You can see, right, there are a couple of ways that's broken down, the study, and a lot of the data we'll reference today is from the Williams Institute at UCLA. So there's impacts on, the type of food that you have access to, as well as the quantity. And in general, across the broader LGBT community, folks are more likely to participate in SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, otherwise known as food stamps. A 2016 data point from the Williams Institute shared that folks are 1.36 times more likely than non-LGBT adults of the same age to participate in SNAP over the past year. So lots of different data out there, right? The US Census Bureau is collecting on this as well via their household pulse survey. They actually just began including sexual orientation and gender identity questions during the pandemic. But the US Census Bureau is reporting that about 13% of LGBT adults live in a household that experience food insecurity versus about 7.2% of non-LGBT adults. So at a macro lens, right, the queer community is objectively disproportionately impacted by some of these issues of food insecurity as well as food insufficiency. But there's also this micro lens to take into account. And I kind of want to start off our multiple choice questions for the day with this one. So according to the Williams Institute, what percentage of LGBTQ+ individuals of color are experiencing or reporting experiences with food insecurity? So I'll give you all another couple of minutes, but a couple of options here ranging from 3.6%, 8.5, 12.1, all the way up to 17.3%. So feel free to vote. And once we close that, we will wrap. Interesting poll responses. So the answer is 17.3%. And this data was recorded immediately post-pandemic. So, or technically we're still in the pandemic, but immediately post kind of quarantine, late 2020 into 2021. And so that 17.3% is a pretty staggering number, right? Among white LGBT folks, it was closer to 10%, 10.1%. Among white non-LGBT folks, that figure was about 6%. So obviously a pretty large differential there. And so when we think about other elements, other factors, there's a lot more to take into account. And the disclaimer, right, is that queer individuals, we are not a monolith. So other identities, other characteristics, as we chatted earlier, are also going to influence those same elements of access, of experience. And for a lot of subcommunities within the broader LGBTQ community, queerness is not only, not at the top of the list in terms of what we choose to prioritize in terms of our identity, but is also not at the top of the list in terms of how we are impacted or why we are impacted. So what that looks like, first, trans folks more likely to be impacted by anti-LGBTQ+ legislation. fewer legal protections, disproportionately impacted by violent crime. For many of our trans peers, there's also, at the end of the day, a question of visibility, safety, access issues that arise there. And that's impacted, and that's reflected in some of these numbers on the screen here in terms of, higher rates of food insecurity and insufficiency. That's also happening across the racial spectrum. This is a huge factor, right? Overall socioeconomic pressures, overall inequities. This element of identity is also one of the largest differentiators in terms of folks' relationships with food. We have, some preliminary data hinting that as a whole, as a holistic group, LGBTQ plus folks have different relationships with food, but that is absolutely magnified when you're thinking about subgroups by race, subgroups by ethnicity. And I think we would be remiss to not kind of point out how folks of minority, racial and ethnic backgrounds are also more likely to experience these issues. So an interesting dilemma here, right? The definition of food insecurity, very low versus low, does take into account some of the split differentials you're seeing on the screen here. You've got enough food versus enough food, but not of the desired kind, versus sometimes or often not enough to eat. But that implies, right, this element of not just access to basic sustenance, but access to culturally relevant foods, specifically as part of the definition of food insecurity or insufficiency. And of course, all of the data, all of the statistics we have taken a look at today are from communities in the United States, where marriage equality is legal, where LGBTQ plus folks have more legal protections than we do in many other countries. But queer people globally don't often enjoy all of those protections, maybe living in areas with less acceptance, which is further going to exacerbate that risk for food insecurity. So what we eat, whether we can eat or not, all of that, that's a big piece of it. But assuming you are lucky enough to not experience food insecurity or insufficiency on a regular basis, the next question becomes, do you have access to participate in broader food systems? And so Vanessa is going to take you through that.
Thank you, Sunny. So we're gonna do another quiz question just to get things started about careers. So this question is, which of these is the highest paid food industry career? Food tech, front of house hospitality, executive chef, restaurant owner, or cookbook author? We'll give you guys a second to try to guess and see what was the most highest paid food industry career. I think it's going to surprise you. I hope we'll see. Okay, get some surprising results here. Okay, we got a good ties here. So the correct answer is food tech. So if you look at this chart here, you will see that a food scientist, a technologist, makes a quite increasingly large amount of money compared to the second question, the second option that was given that you guys voted the most on, restaurant manager. And then we've also got research chef. And then if you notice that baker, pastry artists, or chefs are more on the lower end. And so this is a good conversation to think about. There's a corporate side to food, and then there's an actual like in-person, in-kitchen side. And historically, the more corporate technical side has been paid more. There's a lot of intersections in that conversation that happen, and that is because of access. That is also because of with your career, you are picking a career based off of your skill set, of how you're able to learn, what type of experiences you have, if you went to college, if you didn't go to college, trade school, etc. So those intersections of access and also your race, gender identity, those sexuality, those also come into play when it comes to employment. So there's a lot of conversations with employment of being afraid to apply to certain places because of how you identify. I myself have been denied other opportunities because of how I identify. So when you're looking at getting paid and the opportunities that come from that, there is a little bit of disparity there. I'm not sure if you guys were able to get a chance to read some of the prepared um, documentation. What is it? Links that we sent you guys. But a lot of them were really compelling because this is a conversation that's been happening a lot in the culinary spaces about equity. And the big portion of those conversations that we sent you guys was about a very famous restaurant closing. But they're not actually closing anytime soon. They're closing in the next 2 years. So it brings a conversation with the reason why they decided to close was because they can't afford to stay open because they have to pay fair wages. That's essentially the nutshell. So there's been a lot of discord about why is this now a taboo topic? Obviously, people want to get paid. So of course, post quarantine, a lot of restaurants have been struggling. A lot of people in trying to get into culinary careers. There's been a lot of back and forth of should we come back to culinary? Should we try to do a different avenue? And this is kind of the big reason why this conversation with this article is happening. Food culture is a bridge to the gateway of the future, and we're trying to find evolutions in our workspaces now. The past experiences and the past cultures do not work anymore in our career sets. So when you're having a large restaurant of notoriety coming in and saying like, oh, well, we can't exist anymore because we have to pay people, that's a conversation, right? There's a socio-economic barrier that's happening. At the same time, these same restaurants require free labor because they're doing stages, aka internships, free internships. And that is also an economic barrier because only those that can afford to work for free can have those career opportunities. And those career opportunities offer a lot of elevation in other spaces in fine dining, casual dining, etc. When you're talking about front of house versus back of house, which essentially means those that work in front, servers, bartenders, restaurant managers, restaurant owners, versus back of house, chefs, line cooks, prep cooks, etc. There's also a barrier of opportunity as well. When you're working in the back of house, the pay range is obviously, as you guys can see on this chart, is much different than when you're working in the front side. So not even necessarily talking about skill set, or we're more so talking about how there is a divide of learn opportunities. So how does queerness come into all of this? So we're vetting opportunities with the mind of safety. We are wanting to work in places where we see people like us. We want to be in spaces where we know that it doesn't matter what we look like, who we are, that we are going to be able to work in an environment that will give us opportunities of financial security, mental stability, etc. There is a very large number of workspaces that are using queer bodies for profit. With the same example of the stages and the free internships, working on the line is 16 plus hours of work for minimum wage in many states. So when you're talking about creating an equitable workspace, creating inclusion, it's not entirely true when you're looking at the statistics of where are those people working. Are they working in high paying job spaces? Are they working in the back of house? Are they working on the line? Are they bartenders? Are they sommeliers? Just because you have a percentage on paper of inclusivity and diversity does not exactly mean that the opportunities are as equitable. So that's going to kind of bring us into the conversation of experiences. When you're having experiences in a kitchen, in a corporate environment, a lot of those are framed very differently. So one big thing is we're going to talk about what kind of resistance do you experience at work? The type of work that you do, whether it's fine dining, bakery, management, there are a lot of different resistances because of exactly your existence, honestly. So moving on to the next slide, we're going to talk about how queer is framed, intersections, businesses, and ethics. So queer is framed in different restaurant spaces, again, based off of Sunny previously mentioned there's no such thing as queer food. We get that question a lot. What food is queer, and like how do you make queer food? We are queer, we make the food. That's it. So that's really in its essence of making sure people recognize that just because you have an identity doesn't mean there's some sort of nuance around it. When you're talking about cultures as well, with your intersections, obviously me being a Black Indigenous woman, I have cultures where food is a part of that experience. Me being queer does not contribute to those cultural experiences other than my existence in those spaces contributing to that culture. For example, we're going to talk about intersections in business. Hags is a very large new restaurant in New York City. It is the first queer-owned fine dining restaurant in New York City, which is crazy to say out loud. But they're successful not just because of them existing with gender identities and sexuality at the forefront of their message, but they are producing a working environment, a dining environment where consideration of the people they're feeding come into mind. They are offering a safe space. They're offering a place where you can be who you are and enjoy a fine dining experience, which, as I mentioned previously, for the other restaurant is not the same type of experience that other people get to have. When you see a Black-owned business or a queer-owned business, it is generating a sense of safety. When I walk into a business and I see Black people working, Black people eating there, then I know, okay, this is a place where I don't really have to worry about my comfort levels as much as other places that I would patron. So that's kind of what we're thinking about when we're also working in the kitchens. We're also looking around, who am I going to be working with? Who are my employers? Those type of things also come into play when we're talking about our own safety as workers as well. When the big thing with ethics that is happening, one of the things I wanted to mention was cashless payments. It is one of the more frustrating things that are happening in the restaurant industry. Cashless, if you don't know, is basically we're using food system, computerized systems, so Apple Pay, credit card, that's pretty much it. You can't have actual cash to give to a restaurant. This causes a lot of ethical issues with socioeconomics and classism, racism, those considerations of folks that do not have bank accounts, that are not able to access funding digitally. It keeps them from being able to access simple things such as food, basic necessities. When you create things that are cashless, on the restaurant side of management, they'll say, oh, well, it's easier to process. Obviously, we don't have to do counting money and banking, and there's less fraud and theft. However, with that consideration, you are eradicating a population of people that deserve to be able to have food, to be able to support the community at large and patroning at your establishment. So there is a balance that we're trying to find with creating more progress in the food industry, but also keeping in mind the people that we're serving everyone. And we want to make sure that everyone gets an opportunity to be involved in the
Thanks, Vanessa. So pivoting a little bit, my day job is very different than Vanessa's, but my day job is in innovation for a Fortune 500 food and bev company, a legacy brand. I've been on this side of the industry for most of my professional career. And my first internship, I had a colleague say to me, I don't believe people like you should be allowed to get married. In the office, in the middle of a bunch of cubicles, right? I told him, the report that you asked for will be in your email inbox on Tuesday. And I went about my day. But when we say legacy brands, right, these are brands, these are institutions that are deeply embedded into food systems across the globe, that are decades old, even centuries old, that have been controlling major things like how farmers get compensated in other regions of the world for important agricultural commodities. These are companies who have created these huge routes of infrastructure and compensation that are setting the standard. Often Fortune 500 companies, often publicly traded companies, and a lot of them are being disrupted by challenger brands that are looking to disrupt all of that legacy, all of that infrastructure. With more of a focus on values, more of a focus on human rights, often digitally native, often values driven. And younger brands often do not have a kind of conformist legacy history to contend with. So you can often see them speaking more freely and more authentically, to be honest, with all of those intersectional issues, human rights issues. So all of those things contribute to looking and feeling much better to members of any community that's being impacted. And there's been a lot of discourse as well in recent years about brands' recognition of Pride Month specifically. A lot of that scrutiny is deserved because a lot of organizations are doing the bare minimum in this space. A rainbow logo, maybe if you're lucky, an email to your employees about Pride Month, you may hear terms like rainbow washing or pink washing thrown around. And there are a lot of stories in the news about what not to do, how not to treat the queer community during Pride Month, what not to focus on. And that's been, reflected in a lot of how we're moving forward with the Queer Food Foundation as well. But I led a Pride Month campaign for a legacy brand I was working for at the time. We commercialized a special edition product. We donated profits to a well-known institutionalized nonprofit in the queer space. It was the first initiative in over a century of company history. We were all really excited. And we had a terrible response from consumers, which I think shocked a lot of my colleagues who were not part of the community as well, right? How can people be upset on both sides of the aisle? So even in these institutional spaces where, your identity shouldn't be a part of how you show up to work, shouldn't be a part of a lot of these components, creating progress in those institutionalized environments is slow, requires patience, is very much about change management. It can look like being the only one on your team to put your pronouns in your email signature, even if, like me, you're a cis woman. But there's been progress, there will be progress. But similarly to how Vanessa was kind of sharing in the kitchen, the corporate side of food also requires a lot of patience and a lot of diligence to create that progress.
Progress is the best word I heard, Sunny, because this really brings us into food media. We are seeing a surge of food media happening, especially during quarantine, post-quarantine. We have got TikTok videos, we've got influencers, Food Network, Netflix, everyone's got a competition show, a documentary show. I have been on a few, so I'm also taking a dig at myself here. So we're really looking at how food now is commodified in a media space, which is much different than working, corporate spaces, rainbow capitalism, which is a part of those things as well in these media spaces. So when we're thinking of food media, we're talking about print, television, brand ambassadors, content curation. And when you look at some of the statistics, social media sites like Instagram have given a new approach to food media engagement. This allows serious amateurs and professional chefs to give their audiences. So you'll see in TikTok, we've got a lot of people that are working from home that are making those really thought out videos. Some people are just eating mukbangs and just giving food reviews. And then you've got the celebrity chefs also coming on board and giving their hot tips. So it's a really different way that we've really started to consume type of food. Even hashtag food on Instagram has over 500,000 tags. So people are really getting into of food. When we're talking about anything with media, we are talking about money. Social media, brand ambassadorship, print and digital, it's all focused on how much money can we make? How much engagement can we give people to be involved? How much information people want? And that all has to do with how much money are we going to put in our own pockets. So where is that money actually going? Who is that money going to? Are we giving these same opportunities of making money to queer people? In my opinion, the answer is no. There's a lot of progress. There's a lot of people that are creating cookbooks. There's a lot of folks in queer spaces that are getting opportunities now than they ever would have 10 years ago. So it is a potential moment of progress that is happening, but is it becoming because of rainbow capitalism? Are the pressures of today forcing corporations to take action. And like Sunny mentioned previously, getting a different mixed response based off of how they execute that progress. So that is one of the things we're going to keep in mind when you're talking about food media. And even when I was working on a couple of television shows, there's a lot of conversation of, oh, well, maybe we should make a rainbow crepe cake. Wouldn't they love that? No, they would not like that. I don't want to make it. And other queer folks, we want to just see how we as individuals make food. We want to share our creations without necessarily having our sexuality, gender identity at the crux of that reasoning. We, as an organization for Queer Food Foundation, we get a lot of people that want to work with us in June specifically. And I'll go into more detail about that later. But we really try to encourage folks to not just think of us as the month of June.
Yeah, so Vanessa shared, right, food media has been on the rise, and fundamentally this side of the industry is all about commoditizing stories, commoditizing identities. And there have been a couple of very notable renaissances recently in the food media sphere, and in particular the food journalism sphere, dedicated to representation, dedicated to wage equity and representation of minority communities in some of those spaces. But something that I think folks have not spoken a lot about is the editorialization in the industry, where that identity becomes the entirety of a narrative. And in this case, we're talking about queerness as the narrative. So I've included two headlines of pieces that were published in a major food media publication digitally as part of their Pride Month collection, right? And these are great articles. I actually suggest, either of you take a look. But I think the major piece and what Vanessa was touching on is these are very much articles that have to be about someone's identity, have to be about someone's gender identity, have to be about somebody's sexuality, in order for that journalist or that creator to get that spot in the publication. So just like, people talk about, oh, all the Hallmark movies are about coming out. All the food, all the media, the queer media is about coming out stories, and stories that center identity. A lot of the time there are opportunities that are kind of created in this space that exist only in June, or exist only if folks are willing to talk specifically about their sexuality as a journey, their identity as a journey, as connected to some of these other components. And again, yeah, the opportunities are always increasing during Pride Month, always barren the rest of the year, as long as you're willing to write a piece that centers the narrative of queerness.
So let's talk about money on the other side. When we are also looking to incur funding, it's not necessarily just for individual self, for medias and company brands. We're also talking about community organizations and nonprofits. Why do these organizations exist? Because of a lot of the discussion that we've had previously. There's a lot of inequities, a lot of opportunities that are getting squandered based off of who you are, off of the safety. A lot of people take the camaraderie of food and they make it work for them, and the exploitation. So organizations and nonprofits, we are focused on combating these issues and having organizations to be helpful and resourceful. Let's talk about what resources exist, right? So we've got mutual aid funding, which is a direct funding from donators straight into people's funding pockets that could be potentially facing food insecurity, rent insecurity, etc. We've got community food fridges, which are increasingly happening all over the country, which is amazing to have, but also it's a short-term solution to a long-term problem, right? So these community fridges are placed and they're kind of give one, take one, but they're also needing funding because someone's got to take care of those fridges. Someone has to monitor those fridges. There's a lot of other cities like New York City that get very cold. And so they're even building shelters around these community fridges. Those things cost money. And then we also have soup kitchens and other opportunities for folks to get hot meals. I mentioned Hags previously as a fine dining restaurant in New York City. Hags also has a pay as you can Sunday. So Wednesday through Saturday, they are featured as a fine dining restaurant. Sundays, they have a small menu and it's pay as you can. You come in and they're serving their community head on. We really want to encourage other restaurants to do the same because this is a way to not only engage with your community, support your community, but also to bridge a gap between fine dining, casual dining, and the rest of the community members in the neighborhoods you're in. We're seeing a lot of gentrification and a lot of new restaurants in communities and neighborhoods that they wouldn't ordinarily have thrived in prior to gentrification. So we have to have that conversation of responsibility when you're quote unquote invading a space that was not previously your own, and how you can still be a community member with coming into those new neighborhoods. We also have LGBT centers. The Los Angeles LGBT Center I work with, there's a lot of other centers that are focused on housing, food, job security, resume building, mentorship, and all of these are integral to taking care of our community.
So how do we take care of our community, right? I think that's the next question. And that kind of stems back to, what are we here to do? We're here to show up for our folks. We are here to promote, protect, fund queer food spaces. We're here to participate in and provide the kinds of representation that we all wished we had seen growing up in this space, starting our careers in this space. We are a majority people of color organization. We are a majority women, non-binary, and gender conforming organization. And we're from all different facets of the food system. We've got, pastry chefs like Vanessa. We've got folks who are on the corporate and consumer goods side, like myself. We've got, other chefs. We've got farmers. We've got sommeliers. We have a lot of folks intimately involved in very, very different spheres within the food world. And all of that knowledge, all of that expertise is consolidated, brought together to put our heads together and think about, how can we make a difference in this space? How can we show up for members of our community in ways that are meaningful, ways that are tangible, and ways that, measurably impact their lives?
So talking about the Queer Food Foundation, I previously mentioned, and Sunny mentioned talking about rainbow capitalism and how people only contact us during June. So we have a little a theme here called Queer All Year, and it is our philosophy of accountability. Therefore, we're basically saying that if you wanted to work with us in June, we require that you have to work with us at any other month as well throughout the year. We take approach of doing partnerships in perpetuity or within a certain time frame past June. And this is a way to hold these corporations accountable and to combat the reasonings why they want to support these queer organizations. Anytime we work with a community organization or a corporate organization, we ask them to sign an ethics clause. This is an ethics clause to ensure that who we're working with, who we're collaborating with, their employers, their employees, all know that we're on the same page as far as inclusivity and diversity. So what Queer Food Foundation, what we do is we kind of have a 3-module programming sectors. So we're dedicated to having amplification for queer voices. So we offer resources. We're going to be launching our queer food database at the end of the month. And this will be an opportunity for folks to find each other, sommeliers, farmers, book writers, etc., restaurants, to find each other and support the communities where they are. In New York City, Los Angeles, Seattle, those are major cities. So a lot of those communities know where to support. They know what restaurants and business owners to go to that are queer owned. A lot of smaller cities, southern states, etc., that are not as safe, don't know. So this will be a great opportunity for everyone to be able to support their communities. We're also creating toolkits, educational workshops, and panels. We have a panel series of the James Beard Foundation, also named Queer All Year, and we do it this year. We'll be doing it quarterly, talking about different topics within the queer food intersection spaces. We've hosted previous panels about queer beverage, queer entrepreneurs, queer advocates, queer activists, and food. So we're hoping that this year we'll have a new form of topics, and we definitely encourage you to join those virtual conversations. We also have events. We are going to be giving our first inaugural Queer Food Fest. It's going to be around the country, different parts of throughout the year. Sorry. Our first one will be in Washington, D.C. We're also going to be located in Atlanta, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. We co-hosted one in August with Dave's Lesbian Bar in New York City, and we had a great turnout. We were able to support so many queer food organizations and entrepreneurs. And so we're going to take it on the road and see where else we can support, give local donations to the community organizations that are already doing the hard work in those states and cities. We're also going to be working on dining experiences, cooking class series. We've done collaborations with MoFad. We've also done collaborations with Museum of Modern Art, private events. So we're really trying to find a lot of spaces to bring these conversations and food together. Our community is our highest regard, obviously. So media representation, community building, editorial pieces, like Sunny was mentioning, advocacy, fundraising, those are our main sources of attention. And so we do a lot of mutual aid. We have a Queer Food Fund, which we honor every year during Black History Month. And within 2021, 2022, we were able to raise over $20,000 to go straight to folks, Black and queer, trans folks that may be potentially facing food insecurity. So those are one of the things that we really focus on that are really important, that we're not only just talking about it, we're not only just having virtual conversations, meeting with each other, breaking bread, but we're also taking care of each other in the multiple ways that we need to. So we're going to get into our final question. What current work for progress do you think should be prioritized in today's current climate? Food insecurity, food waste, food production and supply, inclusive opportunities, equal wages. This is just an opinion question. There is no right or wrong answer. I personally believe all of these things need to be addressed, of course, but we just want to know, what do you think should be the most prioritized in this day and age? Also, please don't forget, we're going to have a Q&A section. So if you want to get those questions in, please do so as well.
And one last note also, while you are voting and polling, if it seems like we've got a lot here, a lot of programming, a lot of elements to focus on and prioritize, it is, right? But questions like this, there are no right answers because we have such a long way to go. And for Vanessa and I, for our entire organization, the end game, the ultimate goal of QFF is for us to build infrastructure across all of these pillars for queer folks in the industry, such that we eliminate the need for our organization. So.
Okay, great. So we got the results in. Majority voted food insecurity, which I definitely agree. Food waste and food production and supply as well. Food insecurity is a topic that isn't discussed enough, especially because we're talking about food waste. That those kind of go hand in hand. Food production and supply, those all go hand in hand. All of these underlining sections all kind of come up to food insecurity. If you don't have inclusive opportunities, if you don't have equal wages, that can all contribute to having that food insecurity. Going off of what Sunny was saying, in QFF, what we decided to do is, people ask us all the time, like, where do you want to be in 5 to 10 years? How do you see your organization? We say not existing. And we say that because all of these modules that we're doing, all these pillars that we're championing are already in place in our society, in our structures, that we don't have to constantly advocate and include people when we're trying to work, when we're trying to make money, when we're trying to give money. These are just established because we, gave our hand in helping, but we're not the only ones that do this work. So we have other organizations that we encourage you to check out: the LA LGBT Center, Ali Forney Center, Shad organization, Studio Tao organization, Southern Fried, Queer Pride, and the Trans Wellness Center. And these are just a few around the country that we work with directly and that we encourage you to research about. If any of them are near you, please reach out to them as well. And of course, look for your local organizations that are also doing the hard work. We'd love to work with them and we'd love for you to support them. If you don't have any resources in your area, which is not uncommon, depending on where you're living, there are books and medias to support. So we have a list of esteemed chefs, culinarians, book writers that have had really great conversations in their books about the intersections we mentioned, race, gender, equity, financial security, that we really wanted to share with you as well. So this is kind of our little, this is our QFF bestsellers list, I would say. So we really love for you guys to check those out. And of course, please check us out. We are on Instagram at Queer Food Foundation. You can also visit us at queerfoodfoundation.org, see what we're up to. We'd love to have support. We'd love to talk with you guys, answer questions. We also try to do as much as we can to support those in academia as well. So if there's something that you want to be a part of or that we haven't thought of and you want to bring it to the table to us for the support, please don't hesitate to reach out as well. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sunny and Vanessa. It was such a really dope presentation to listen to. I learned so much in this short amount of time. So we have a lot of questions from students that I'm sure will continue to roll in over the next 30 minutes. So let's jump into the Q&A. Is that okay?
Let's do it.
Okay. So let's see, what foods are associated with queer celebrations, if any? Are there any foods associated with queer celebrations, such as pride festivals or pride parades or important commemorations, such as the anniversary of the Stonewall Uprising, James Baldwin's birthday, and other kinds of important events?
Yeah, I can take this one. I think this is an area that I think we touched on a little bit, but there's not, necessarily one correct answer or one specific food, one specific type of food or cuisine that's been centered around a lot of these celebrations, a lot of these kind of tentpole queer moments in history as well. And even if there were, we've lost a lot of that history. So as part of the queer community in general, right? Something that is not always highlighted, not always discussed, is the fact that we are operating with significantly lower rates of like cultural records, even oral history, down across generations by virtue of the AIDS epidemic, as well as by virtue of visibility issues. And so I think that's kind of impacting, some of the foodways and food traditions are a new opportunity for queer folks in food to kind of start and spotlight ourselves. So I guess I would say to date, there's nothing that's really popping out, at least from my perspective, around some of those big moments. But I think there are opportunities for us in the future to think about, hey, as we come together around food, around these big moments in kind of our community history, what does it look like to have a food that's centered around that or that's recognizing that?
I would like to add that just because we don't have any doesn't mean you can't support queer food, right? We're talking about Stonewall Uprising and James Baldwin's birthday. Queer Black people, queer trans Black people, we have restaurants, we have organizations, we have pop-ups and things of that sort. So even though we don't have specific food dedicated to queer celebrations, you can celebrate those queer people by giving them support financially and supporting their businesses as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I also think about your partnerships with like the James Beard Foundation as something that's trying to reclaim or make a mark in that queer food history as well. So I think that's really interesting. Another question from a student would be, have you looked into food or wine appreciation and etiquette courses or workshops for those seeking to level up their experiences along with their identity? An example is a trans man or woman seeking instruction on how to handle fine dining experiences in their new chosen identities.
Ooh, I love that. Um, so yes, we actually have looked into food and wine appreciation etiquette courses. That is something on our project list that we're going to try to work with this year, actually, potentially with James Beard Foundation, that you mentioned it. So those are topics of conversation we're having about bringing in educational series in person to really specify the needs of the queer and trans communities, and how we navigate those new spaces with their identities, and just even there's not a lot of queer sommeliers, like let's get them registered, let's get them taught, and let's enrich them.
I think the other component with that as well is that the fine dining industry is really evolving very quickly. Right, some of those conversations that Vanessa brought up around Noma and Copenhagen, but more broadly, there is a big change in terms of how diners interact with fine, quote unquote, fine dining spaces, more exclusive, more white tablecloth, more, small plates, French inspired background, etc. And a lot of those kind of constructions of what we as diners and as consumers thought fine dining looked like, and therefore a lot of the etiquette and a lot of the kind of traditional instruction around that, as that is eroding, there are opportunities for us to say, what might this look like for somebody with XYZ background? What might this look like for somebody whose experience with the rest of their life, right, has not followed this mold? How does that fit in this new definition of fine dining spaces?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for unpacking that for us. So the corporate food scene is really like a hot topic, and there's always a lot of questions around how can corporations better combat food insecure regions. Some people call them food deserts. Us on the justice side tend to call it food apartheid, for what it really is, right? And since grocery stores are also focused on profitability, as you all shared, and not necessarily changing the status quo, what is the responsibility of corporate food actors and building equity and justice within the system?
Yeah, I think I can take this one, or at least part of it. And I think one of the places to start is, ironically enough, with food waste, and with product that is going out of code, product that's about to expire. It's making sure we're really conscientious about all of our forecasting, all of our numbers. And when we do have product that is going to expire, when we do have product that isn't going to make it to a shelf for whatever reason, thinking more critically about where that goes and where there are opportunities for us. Maybe we mislabeled a bottle of a spice on a line, but that spice is perfectly good. Maybe that's an opportunity for us to say, hey, let's diversify our network of community organizations and community partners, and make sure that, folks who are taking advantage of a food bank or a community fridge or a similar resource actually have access to, fresh spices or food that they maybe wouldn't have access to otherwise. So I think it's obviously, you're a for-profit organization, but thinking about where in all of that there are opportunities to give back in ways that, can actually also have a positive impact on your overall climate impact and your overall kind of footprint as an organization.
I think that's a good point too. On the restaurant side, we get a lot of questions about food waste and what happens to the food when at the end of the day, why aren't you guys donating the food? So I can only speak for Los Angeles just because I worked in those restaurants the most, like North Carolina as well. The answer is, unfortunately, with legal systems, that it's kind of, this is the reason why they give, which I think is a lazy reason, but they like to say that, oh, well, we can't donate it because if people get sick, which does happen off of improper handling of the food, then the restaurant is liable. So they haven't bridged a gap with the city and offering an opportunity for the restaurants to not be held accountable, and also give them resources to safely transfer those foods to people. So there is opportunity to reduce food waste and also serve the communities, but they're not making it work. They want to put a lot of legalities around it. So there are a lot of ways to do that. In addition to talking about food deserts, right? There was a big conversation in Los Angeles, specifically in Inglewood. There there was a grocery store, a major grocery store chain. There's only maybe 2 or 3 grocery stores in Inglewood. Inglewood is considered a food desert, which is crazy considering Los Angeles, 10 to 20 minutes down the street, has like 7 Whole Foods. So during quarantine, there was a mandate for hazard pay. So if you're working in restaurants or certain places, that you'll get an increased wage. This major food chain said instead of paying their workers hazard pay, they're just going to close the grocery stores. So you're talking about an area of a neighborhood that's already a food desert, that doesn't even have grocery stores and access. They're taking buses that are not even nearby. We don't have a huge public transit area in Los Angeles. And now you're taking away their grocery store, which is their only main source of food in those areas. So now we're looking at people that instead of taking 1 bus or 2 buses to get grocery, they're now taking 3 buses. They're spending 2 to 3 hours of their day and their lives just for transportation to get to food.
Yes, thank you for that. Another question is, how large is QFF as an organization? Do you all pay folks for their time, or is it an organization of people who are just working other jobs in the food industry?
I will take this one. We are 100% a volunteer-based organization. We are like we call small and mighty. So there are 15 of us in total within founders, board of directors, and advisory board members. So everyone has jobs. Everyone has full-time jobs. We would love to be in a space where via donations, grants, and opportunities that we'll be able to not only serve our community in real spaces of giving back, but also serving our community in ways where we can have more time to focus on these things. So it's definitely on our forefront. It's definitely top of our mind. We do want to start offering internships and things like that. So in due time.
Sonny, do you have anything to add to that?
I do not.
Double checking. All right, our next question in the queue. Where do you see the most promise, excitement, and/or potential for disruption in the space for queer communities? Is it tech, media, climate change and food access, something else?
Ooh, I really like this. I know y'all, as part of kind of the requisite readings for this week, had a podcast around queerness and climate justice, queerness and food as well. And I think climate is a really big one. I think all of these spaces, right, Courtney, are spaces where we would love to see progress and representation, and spaces in which we think queer bodies deserve progress and representation. But I think, with some of the numbers we shared, with some of the results of the poll as well, food is fundamentally, right, about how we're interacting with communities, how we're interacting with the environment. And I think queer people also fundamentally are thinking differently, thinking more critically about how to preserve and protect some of our natural resources, thinking critically about what we owe to each other and how to protect spaces, how to build community spaces. That's something that we're, all pretty good at, is seeking and building community. And I think how we care for the planet is going to be a really central topic in that conversation.
So next question.
Go ahead, sorry.
No, please add if you.
Oh, I was gonna say that similarly to backing off what Sonny was saying about climate change and food access, I think this is where those other portions of tech and media come into play. Using those platforms to hold to kind of spread the message, right? Educating the masses, because these things are necessary. If people don't know mostly about what's going on, except for the people that are experiencing it, then it's much more difficult to get that support. There's plenty of support to happen. There's plenty of money to go around. We just need to advocate and hold people accountable that aren't giving that money, that aren't, these tech spaces and media spaces in food. Why aren't they giving money to food insecurities? Why aren't they giving more access and visibility to climate change and things of that sort? The same exact places that they're profiting off of. So I do think that they all kind of do come together to have a disruption and make it so that they coincide together.
Yeah, I think that's one of the many impressive things about the organization, right? You're focused on the production side of things, but also on the consumption side of things. So attending to the consequences of climate crisis and the inequities that those produce, but also focused on how can we transfer that into the corporate industry. Okay, so as of right now, what do you think is the biggest advancement made for the LGBTQ plus community in the food industry? Biggest advancement? There's so many ways to think about that.
Biggest advancement. I guess I can share my perspective, which I would say is visibility. Right, the fact that Vanessa and I are even here, able to have this conversation with all of you, A, huge privilege. So thank you so much. But B, the way that folks within the food media space specifically, ironically enough, are being highlighted for their contributions. And then there's also the call out of holding an identity in the queer space or identity in the LGBTQ space. I think that's been the biggest thing, is just, hey, we're here. And so we can start with that. We can start with the representation and the visibility, and then use that to move into equity building and infrastructure building. So
I think money. I think that's the biggest advancement. Getting paid. With visibility, there is a lot of times where queer people get opportunities that are not paid. They advocate for, oh, well, we're spreading visibility. We want you to kind of spread your message and tell your story, but for free. And so that is an advancement that we're working on, that has improved of, pay us for our story is so great, then fund the story of the person, right? So I think that kind of goes hand in hand of giving people of these queer spaces in our industry equitable wages for the work that they're doing, to stop exploitation of queer energy and bodies.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing all of that. Mrs. Moyo here, my twin. So we're gonna get into the next question. All right, as someone who lives at the intersection of queerness and being disabled and neurodivergent and experiencing food insecurity, how do you recommend navigating looking for inclusive opportunities?
This is a really good question as well. Man, y'all have so many good questions. I think my answer to this would be ask the right questions. Ask the right questions, be transparent about what you need, what you're looking for, what kind of environment that you will be successful in anytime you're looking for these opportunities, right? You want to ask a question every time you're meeting somebody who could potentially be a new manager. You want to ask a question about what it's like to work on a team. You want to ask a question about, what a current environment is and looks like, so that and you can kind of categorize in the back of your head, is this going to be something where I'm going to have to really shape myself to fit into this environment and to shape myself into this mold? Or is this something where I can come from day one, square one, full self to work, or into, whatever this space is? And I think that can be a hard thing to balance and a hard thing to manage, is asking the right questions. So there's time and practice involved in that. But I think understanding what are the non-negotiables for me in a space, how much emotional time and energy do I have to be able to navigate change and expecting other people to change? How much work am I willing to do, essentially unpaid work am I willing to do to educate those around me in an environment or in an opportunity? And those are not questions that any of us can answer for each other. But I think it's, where is this environment? Where are they starting from in terms of inclusivity? And do I feel comfortable with that level?
I think Sunny made a great point on research. When you're talking about being queer, disabled, neurodivergent, when you're talking about those things as far as inclusive opportunities, it's very difficult. There's a very fine line, right? Because when you're interviewing, when you're researching, you don't want to always have to disclose everything that's going on with you, right? Like when I walk into an interview, I don't feel like I should have to say, oh, I'm a queer person. And also sometimes, depending on that job, you can't really say that based, like when you're interviewing, there's a lot of even having hiring issues because of your intersections can be complicated. So where do you find those safe workplaces without spewing out like this, everything about you that is personal, but also important for you, right? So I think off of what Sunny was saying, research is really asking like the right questions without making yourself feel like you're volunteering your personal information. I think you really have to take care of yourself and know that you have these boundaries of what you're willing to disclose, what you're willing to take care of, and making sure that with that proper research and asking questions that you're balancing your health as well.
So I want to combine a few of our questions, just looking at our time, and ask about the agricultural production side of things, disparities with that, with queer farm workers or farmers, and also renewed attention to unionizing. I think these maybe could be related slightly. Unionizing in the food industry and protections for queer folks. So on the one hand, where do you see disparities for queer farm workers on an agricultural side? And also, where do you see this renewed interest in unionization?
I'll go. So I'm not very too well versed on the unions of agriculture and specifically the intersection of queerness. But unions in general, where you're talking about agriculture, the big argument with agriculture, right, is the big corporations. You've got small working farmers, you've got that are being literally racketeered by these big corporations. They only want to pay what they want to pay, and either you deal with it or you're not going to get paid at all. They control how you even facilitate your own spending. You have to wait to get paid from them because they're the distributors. So it goes all the way of a trickle down space that we like to talk about as well, because people, when they're talking about food, a lot of times in food systems, even when you're talking about what we're advocating for, exclude queer farmers, exclude farming and unionization, because they're not thinking about the epicenter or the genesis of where food starts. It starts with them, right? And so when you're dealing with these big corporations like these grocers that maintain the control, not only for those that are making and harvesting the food, but then how people get access to the food, there's a lot of disconnect there. And there's a lot of corporate greed that is happening. And so when you're talking about queer individuals, that impacts queer people. Again, I feel like we always go back to food insecurity, right? We're always going back to equitable wages and inclusivity, because all of those things, that is the main issue that happens when you have this exploitation.
Yeah, that's really great. I think within the context of queerness in agriculture specifically. It's something that as an organization at QFF, we've really had to consciously think about, how do we spotlight this work more? How do we talk about this work more? Because there's not, as much as we talk about visibility, there isn't the same level of attention to visibility within folks who are actually working in food production directly, in agricultural food production directly. And I think that's, for a lot of reasons, I would say primarily rural environments versus urban environments, some of the coastal demographics versus more landlocked demographics as well. You get almost this space where it's easier to have these big, broad conversations about queerness and representation and what we're working towards and what we deserve in environments where, you have a more concentrated number of queer folks, environments where, you aren't perhaps the only one holding this torch or bringing these conversations to the forefront. I think the nature of agricultural work often means that you're working in a less concentrated space. You may be working in a space that's inherently less progressive, less inclusive, less likely to allow you to express that identity, and also less likely to allow you to, work towards progress for other folks who share that identity. And I think that's something that, with broader concepts of food sovereignty, not just among the queer community, but among communities of color as well, we're seeing this progress and this reclamation. And I think, if y'all know any queer farmers, for sure, put us in touch. But we are looking to kind of deliberately expand that network and reach out to those folks, because it is just an area where there has been less conversation, less representation, less visibility at the core of all of these systems.
I did want to quickly add that this is a difficult pinpoint, right? Because queerness is not a hyper visual identity. So it's not even like employers can walk around and say, hey, who's queer? Who's queer? So the statistics, rather, even if we have them or not, are skewed, because it's about the participation of being out, being, knowing, having the knowledge of where these queer spaces are. So that's one reason, like Sonny was saying, of like reaching out, because even if we were to work with the organization, unless it's a disclosed individual, we're not going to know. We don't know where they are unless they tell us they're there. So that's a big thing that we want to bridge the gap on, especially within farming and other agricultural spaces.
Okay, we want to transition into our word cloud. If you could go ahead and hit the link that Megan sent in our chat and put one word, idea, a big takeaway from our presenters this evening, and thank them for their participation. We covered a lot of ground this evening, and I know that we all learned new things. So if you go ahead and hit that link that Megan sent, and we'll see how our word cloud is shaping up. Inclusivity, food tech, recognition, absolutely. Visibility, identity, all good stuff. Okay, well, with that, let's thank our presenters, wherever you are and whenever you are watching this. And we will see everyone next week. Same time, same place. Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you so much.
For having us.